Larry Barker is back here again in the KRQE News 13 digital studio. Larry, you are here today to talk a little bit more about this latest investigation regarding a big problem found in Colfax County. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Yeah, we call it the big oops.
Yeah, the big because, oops, for sure.
It was really a tiny little mistake. It was just somebody made a little mistake, and it amounted to $1.74.
Right.
And you just don't think about it, but those little government mistakes are really magnified, and in this case, it was a mistake. It really did impact about 23,000 New Mexicans.
Wow.
And the dollar amount total was about $1.3 million.
Wow.
And the thing about this is nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Maybe because the mistake was so minimal. I mean, let's face it, the annual budget for the state of New Mexico is more than $7 billion. So when somebody makes a $1.74 mistake, you understand how somebody might not notice.
Right. So this $1.74 mistake, it has to do with basically the property tax rate. I know you mentioned in there it's the mill rate. So just to explain this briefly, you know, for people who own property, you get your property tax bill, and essentially you've got the value of your property that gets calculated by the county usually, and then this mill rate changes depending on where you live, county to county, right? And maybe depending on whether you live in a city or out of a city, but your property tax rate depends on where you live. And then this mill rate, though, is essentially the multiplier, right? It's the factor that truly matters in how much you pay, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, just for example, if you live in Bernalillo County, there's one thing that everybody in the county has in common when it comes to property taxes, and that's the property tax rate.
Right.
So the Bernalillo County's property tax rate is then multiplied times your property value, and that's how they arrive at what you owe in terms of your property taxes. So, Chris, if you own property in Bernalillo County, right, and I own property in Bernalillo County, our property tax rate will be the same.
Right.
What'll be different is what you pay in property tax and what I pay in property taxes.
Based on the value of the property itself, the home,
right?
Right.
And the property tax rate is different for each of New Mexico's 33 counties.
Right.
So the property tax rate in Bernalillo County is going to be different than the property tax rate in Colfax County. And it's a very complicated calculation that determines what the property tax rate is. Mm-hmm. Depends on things like, you know, oil and gas in a county, mm-hmm, livestock in a county, if there's a higher education institution or a schools. Mm-hmm. There's so many things that go into that property tax rate. Mm-hmm. It is determined, it's figured out by the state. It's the local government division of the Department of Finance. Their staff for each of the counties determines what that property tax rate is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the mistake was made.
Yeah, in that local government division, it sounds like, of the state there.
Right, right.
And so this essentially was, the mill rate was off by $1.74, but that adds up, as we mentioned. That's kind of the multiplier, right? And so you say you own a big property in Angel Fire, say it's a $3 million home, that extra, you know, $1.74 on the mill rate can multiply and cost you a lot more money, essentially, than it should because of this miscalculation.
I mean, let's say that the mill rate for Colfax County should have been, just as an example, mm-hmm, $10.
Yeah.
So that $10 would be times your property tax value, and that determines what you pay in your property taxes. But let's say they made a mistake, and they said, well, your property tax value is $12. Well, then it's $12 times your value of your property. So there's a difference between 10 times, 10 times your property value, or 12 times.
Right.
12 times is too much.
Yeah.
So, and that went on for 2 tax years.
Wow.
And it was caught in an audit sometime later.
Yeah.
An annual audit say, whoa, wait a second, the property tax rate's wrong.
Yeah. So obviously this had been out here, there, it was caught. And I wanted to ask you, as we do these kind of behind the story segments, learning a little bit more about the reporter and how they put this story together. How did you hear about this story? Was it that audit, or did somebody, from the area say, hey, we've got a problem here, you should check it out?
Actually, I got a tip from somebody in Colfax County and said, hey, did you know that the county overcharged its residents in its property taxes?
Yeah.
And I had not heard that. I didn't know that. And so we did investigate it and document it. It was absolutely true. And most of the officials in state government and in county government, Colfax County, kind of fell on their sword and said, yeah, well,
yeah,
it happened. And now the county is in the process of refunding the excess money, the overcharges.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. You said they're now in the process. So how are they doing this? Are they going one by one? Is everybody getting a check around the same time? And maybe where's the money coming from?
Well, that's an interesting question. Where's the money coming from? Because the property taxes is what runs the county. I mean, that's what they depend on for their programs and for salaries, and that's what the county depends on that. So in Colfax County's case, they took in too much money.
Yeah.
So I did ask them, how did this impact county's government ability to operate, because they've got to give some of that money back.
Right.
And they said that it had a small impact. Is they did have to cut some programs.
I see.
Because the money they thought was there is actually inappropriate, and they got to give it back.
Yeah. So in the refunds as well, how those are going out? You said that they're in the process of doing these refunds. Are people getting them, little by little, essentially?
Yeah, it's gradual, and it's incredibly complicated. Mm-hmm. Let's say you owned property in 2020, and then you sold your house, mm-hmm. or moved to Albuquerque. So you're qualified for a refund, but then they've got to locate you. So, property changes hands all the time.
Right.
So the county is responsible for tracking down all these people who overpaid and get them their money back.
Wow.
In most cases, they're doing credits on their currently owned property taxes. So if they overpaid in 2019 and 2020 for their current taxes owed, they'll give them credits for the overcharges.
Interesting.
For the most people. But it's actually fairly complicated. We're talking about 23,000 refunds, and you got to track down all these people. And were they overcharged? Did they buy the property later? It's complicated. The Colfax County Treasurer, Lydia Garcia, is the one responsible for making the refunds.
Interesting. One of the things we talked about right before we started recording this segment, you had mentioned there was the bit about how this all came to happen. We know this was essentially a mistake that was made within a state department, but you were mentioning to me how a lot of this work of calculating the mill rate was not done in a sort of automated fashion, right, or a more helpful system. Can you tell me what is changing now to maybe prevent this from happening in the future?
Right. Now, this mistake, it occurred at the State Department of Finance and Administration, what's known as the Local Government Division, and that's what they do, is they calculate the property tax rate for all 33 counties. and this is the first mistake they've made in 14 years.
Wow.
So it's very unusual.
Yeah.
But what's kind of bizarre about all this is the calculation is complicated. It's a lot of factors and formulas that go into determining what that rate is.
Right.
The state has been doing that not on computer. They do it on spreadsheets.
Wow.
And it kind of blew me away when they first told me that no, it wasn't done by computer. It wasn't a computer mistake. Mm-hmm. It was or a data entry mistake. It was done by hand.
Wow.
On spreadsheets. Now, since this has happened, the local government division has gotten an appropriation from the legislature to automate the process. So this should not happen again. It is now fully automated. It was not when this happened. So I suppose you could say that that's a good thing.
Right.
It's a bad thing for Colfax County, but it should not happen again.
Interesting. One of the things I wanted to follow up with you about as well is I know in your story you did try to reach out to Christy Graham, the assessor. She should have been one of the safeguards, as I understand from the story, that maybe saw, hey, there's something fishy, there's something up with this rate, but obviously we know that didn't happen. You tried to speak to her in the story. You were told that she was going to be in meetings for several hours. Did you ever hear from Miss Graham after this interaction you had with her?
We did not, and we reached out to her numerous times. We did have a couple of brief phone conversations. Mm-hmm. I wanted to sit down and do an interview about the impact this had on Colfax County. She is the elected official. She's the assessor. It's her job to send out the property tax notices. In this case, they were wrong. Now, the state government, Department of Finance and Administration, mm-hmm. accepted responsibility for making the mistake. But under state law, the counties are required to double check the figures.
Right.
If Colfax County had double checked the figures, they would have caught the mistake.
Okay.
That didn't happen.
Yeah. Now,
Christy Graham is the assessor, and that's her job. And all we want to do is ask her what happened. She just absolutely refused to be interviewed on this. We can't force her to be interviewed. We did when we were up in Colfax County and Raton last week. Mm-hmm. We did go by to try to talk to her, and an assistant said that she was on the phone and would be on the phone for several hours and was not available to speak with us. Right. And we've not heard from her since.
Interesting. Has there been any fallout from that since I guess has there been any fallout directed towards her office or her position, maybe even from county commissioners since this has all come up? Obviously, you spoke to one of the county commissioners in there, Bobby Ledoux. He was pretty concerned that something like this, but we also know that the assessor is a duly elected position, right? It's not a position where commissioners can just hire and fire an assessor. It's up to the voters to do that, essentially. So
that's right. That's right. Nobody that I talked to in Colfax County was shirking their responsibility. Colfax County accepts what happened. It was a mistake. It should have been caught. They admit that, and it's being refunded to the residents,
right.
The 23,000 people.
Okay.
So, it's hard to put blame on one person for what's happened. It is shared responsibility. The county commission ultimately has a responsibility of ensuring that property taxes are correct. In this case, they weren't. So nobody was pointing fingers. The assessor bears some responsibility. The county commission bears some responsibility. It's very unusual what's happened here. But there are lessons that have been learned, mm-hmm. and there have been things that have been changed to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, it is a pretty big oops, as you said, for something like this to happen, because I think it is interesting. I think Bobby Ledoux speaks a little bit to this, but the fact that had this not been caught, I mean, you could have been looking at years and years and years of totals. And then, you know, as you mentioned, property changes hands. How do you get a hold of the old property owners who paid the taxes? And it can get a lot more complicated over just over that time frame. So pretty good thing that it got caught so quickly. Larry, is there any way to get a hold of you if people have any questions, comments, or maybe a story idea if they think their tax bill might be wrong?
You should always check your tax bill. Now, this mistake, if you had checked your tax bill, you probably would not have noticed. It was a technical error, and if you looked at your tax bill, you're probably not going to know that the property tax rate was wrong. But you should always check your notice. I just got mine the other day in the mail,
right.
And you should always look it over. And if something doesn't look right, you pick up the phone and you call the county assessor.
Yeah.
And that's for anybody in New Mexico who owns property.
Yeah.
Best way to contact us would be through email, and you can contact us through the KRQE website.
Absolute. Okay. Well, Larry, thanks for this investigation. We look forward to more in this month of May here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.